Hello and welcome back, everyone. This is Gina from McGuire, and I hope you're having a good day. So today I am sharing some watercolor techniques that I call faux tie-dye. I really couldn't come up with a name for the techniques as I was doing them, but Lila suggested they look like tie-dye, so I decided to go with that. These are effortless watercolor techniques that give such unique and cool-looking results, so I'm excited to share them with you. Now I'll share some tips along the way on how to use these really unique watercolor pieces on a clean and simple card. Sometimes that's what I struggle with most. I create some funky looking watercolor background, but then I can't figure out how to incorporate it into a card in a clean way. So we'll talk about that too. I'll also talk about using up scraps and some other tips along the way. You could use a variety of watercolors for the techniques that I'm sharing. However, I decided to use the Pinkfresh Studio liquid watercolors. There are 12 colors in this line, and you can see the bottles that they come in. Now, this bottle shape is new. It's a round bottle. The ones I'm using in today's video are square bottle, and they've since changed the packaging, so I just wanted to mention that. The bottles do have an eyedropper top, which I like because it allows you to control how much you use, so you don't have to worry about any going to waste. I'm going to show you the 12 colors here and point out my favorites along the way. That bubblegum is definitely a great pink color. Now, there are many different forms of watercolor out there. The reason I reach for these today is because I like liquid watercolor because I can make less of a mess. I find that oftentimes if I have a palette of watercolor, like the little pans, I make a mess of them. So in this case, I can put a little drop on my glass work surface, pick it up with water, or I can just put a little bit on my project as I'm doing here and paint as I wish. You can see here also the beautiful orange clementine, the sunshine yellow, and this is a very vibrant key lime color. Now keep in mind you can water these down for softer colors or very easily mix them to create your own. Now check out this sky color, the next one here. It is a light color right out of the bottle, which I'm really thankful for. I use a lot of watercolor for sky backgrounds, but sometimes I have a hard time controlling the color and keeping it light enough. So I like that that is light right out of the bottle. But if I wanted to make it darker, I could add a touch of this sapphire color. So you can really stretch these colors to get more from them, but my favorites are definitely the sky, the sunshine, the key lime, the bubblegum, and the clementine. And another nice thing, they have a black included in this line. Okay, so I just wanted to give you a look at the colors. I'll be using these today straight out of the bottle without a brush, but keep in mind you can use them with a brush for traditional watercolor. I'm using Tim Holtz watercolor paper today. It's my favorite because it is bright white, and that's very important to me. I also have a water wash bottle. I just keep this large bottle in my craft room filled with water so I can quickly and easily refill my spray bottles, my water brushes, or make a little puddle of water on my work surface to mix with. I'll link below to an inexpensive water wash bottle. I really find it handy to have in my craft room. Now it's time to create the fun backgrounds, and these can be so addictive. Now there are two ways to do it, and the first way I'm going to show you is to put drops of color onto your watercolor paper and then adding mist of water. So here I'm just putting 3 drops right onto my watercolor paper. You can see how it's handy to have liquid watercolor in this case. And I'm adding a few spritzes of water, and check out how that color starts to move. Now it's pretty cool, right? But it's a little weird, and how do you incorporate that into a background? At least I have a hard time incorporating it. So I'm going to show you how to take it a little step further, still have that cool effect, but add more to it and put it onto a clean cut card. But we're just going to start with the backgrounds now. So now I'm coming in after that first part is dry, or pretty much dry, adding some of that sky color and then spraying some water, and that kind of helps to blend it all together. I'm going to repeat that process. I do find that you want to mist less and let the color move a little bit on its own before you add more water. If you add more water, it just begins looking washed out. Okay, here's another example. This time I'm using that dark purple color. Now, the darker the color, the more intense the effect. However, sometimes you end up with those spots in the middle that look a little too dark. What I like to do with those is take the corner of a baby wipe or a paper towel and just absorb a little bit of that color away. I find that makes the background look a little bit better and easier to use on a card. So I'm going to continue to do this process. Here I did some emerald and green colors. And again, if I find it too dark in certain spots, I can just absorb some away. I'm not really pressing down on the paper with this paper towel, but rather just letting the paper towel touch it lightly to absorb any excess. Now you'll see these are very quick. I'm not doing anything fancy here. I will set these aside and let them dry on their own, but you could heat set them to move it along if you wanted to. You can also do different colors next to each other and let the colors move into each other. Sometimes at this point, it looks like a hot mess, but when you give it some time to dry, they usually end up looking great. And with today's technique, you can use just parts of it. You don't need to use the entire background. You just pick out the area of the final result that you like the most. So don't be discouraged if there's a spot or a side that you don't like the final result, because you can cut that down. Okay, here I'm putting quite a bit of color down, spraying that together, and look at that really cool effect. You could leave those large drops if you want to, but for me, I find if I remove some of that, I'm happier with the results in the end. Some of these look like fireworks to me. Lila was considering calling this a firework technique, but we decided to go with tie-dye just because of the way the color moves out. Now, if you do not have liquid watercolor with the eyedropper tip like I'm using here, you could instead load up a brush with some watercolor and water and put drops with the brush onto your project. Just make sure you make the color very intense on your brush so that the technique is most effective. You can also try any dye ink reinkers you have. Those might work for this technique too. Now there's a second way to do this technique, gives a little bit of a different result, but uses all the same supplies in a different order. This time I'm starting with my watercolor paper and spraying it pretty generously with water, and then dropping in drops of watercolor. This gives such an immediately cool look. I mean, check this out. It's just fascinating to me. I could sit here and do this all day. I just think it looks so cool. And you can add more water if you want to. You can add more color. Again, I'm not using much of the watercolor to do this. Then you just need to set this aside and leave it be. Try not to fuss with it. Let it do its own work once again, and you'll be happy with the results in the end. If you are like me and you can't wait, you can use your heat gun to kind of push the color in certain directions and also speed up the drying process. But you can see the fun kind of tie-dye look that you get with this. And when you trim it down after it's dry, it'll look even better. Okay, so let's do another example of that. I'm spraying my paper generously with water and adding drops in of a few different colors here. I've got the sapphire there. And you can see how the color starts to move in the area where you sprayed the water. So if you want to create a bigger area, you just want to spray a larger area. I just sprayed kind of here in the middle. And you can always add more water to it to keep things moving more. Now it was a little dry in that spot, so that color didn't move right away. So I went ahead and sprayed it more. And those colors will all work their way around and create a really cool effect. So you can see if you're not happy with the whole piece, don't worry about it because you can always cut out the part that you like. Check out how cool that yellow moves on a watered background. So you could create a fun sunshine background with this. With just one color, you can do really neat effects. So if you're like me and struggle with creating really great watercolor backgrounds, this is a fun way to do it. And there's also something therapeutic about watching that color move. I just enjoy it. Okay, so now that I have a bunch of crazy tie-dye looking watercolor pieces, I wanted to create some simple frames to go around the portions that I like the most of the watercolor, and then create some clean and simple cards. I'm using the Pinkfresh Floral Squares dies. Now you could use any kind of die that has an open area or a frame element to it. I die cut a bunch of these from white cardstock, and I'm using some Gina Connect glue to stack 3 or 4 of them together. Now, you do not need to do this, but I really like the look of a stacked frame die cut. It really gives a nice definition around the colored piece that we're going to add. It makes it stand out more. You could instead take a piece of craft foam and die cut from that, and then put one paper die cut on top of it, and that will give you the dimension. But there is something very nice about how substantial and how thick stacked paper die cuts are. And in between putting the layers together, I put something heavy on it while it dries for a few minutes, and usually that's my cell phone. Okay, now it's time to add these layered die cuts onto our watercolor piece. Just make sure your watercolor is completely dry. You could use spray adhesive for this. I'm not a fan of using that spray adhesive, but you could do that. Or you could use like a stick-it adhesive that you put on your cardstock before you die cut. But when I'm doing this much, I find it more economical to use a liquid adhesive, and then I can do all the die cutting and layering that I want. So here you can see I'm just taking my pieces and picking out my favorite portion of the watercolor background, and then putting something heavy over it while it dries. Okay, so once I have all my frames added to my crazy backgrounds, it's time to cut them out. I just use scissors and cut right up against the edge of the frame. And then I end up with all these fun, colorful pieces. Now keep in mind, I have lots of scraps left over and I never let those go to waste. So before we finish off our cards with the frames, I want to show you what I did with the scraps since we're here and have them ready. For the scraps, I just took these little leaf dies from this Pinkfresh Hello with Botanical die set. And I'm just going to die cut as many little leaf pieces I can out of all my remaining leftover watercolor backgrounds. So I die cut as many pieces as I could from my scraps, and then I just glued them randomly onto a piece of white cardstock and trimmed it down. I added that onto a black note card, and then I added little yellow gems in between my die cuts for a bit of sparkle. You can see all the fun watercolor effects on those die cuts, and it was a great way to use up scraps. I kept the card simple and only added a thinking of you sentiment. It's from this Pinkfresh Studio Bloom stamp set. I've used the sentiments from this one several times in videos. And I white heat embossed it on black cardstock and added that with a piece of foam tape. So I just wanted to show you how I use those scraps. Okay, now let's go back to those watercolor frames that we created, and I'll just show you the cards that I made. They're very simple. This is a 4 1/4 by 4 1/4 square white note card, and I added one of my frames along with a little Take Care sentiment strip. I added that sentiment strip with tiny pieces of foam adhesive, and that sentiment is from this Pinkfresh Studio Pretty Paisley stamp set. I like that sentiment Take Care. It can be used for many things, and since it's so small, you can add it to just about any card anywhere you want. Here we have another. I really like the watercolor effect on this one. All I did was add a little Enjoy Your Day sentiment strip from this Pinkfresh Playful Animal Friends 1 stamp set. This is another set that I've used several times in videos. Absolutely adorable, and there are great small sentiments on it that are perfect for sentiment strips. And by the way, I'll link below in my description to the square envelopes that I use for my square cards. Okay, here's another example. This time I made a 3 1/4 by 5 inch card, and I stamped the sentiment underneath it. This is from the Pinkfresh Studio Happy Everything stamp set. Many of these stamp sets that you're seeing are ones that I've used many times before because there are so many sentiments in it. I go back to them often. Here's another that I did the same way, but on a normal card size. So this is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. So you can see even on a large card with all that white space, your eye is drawn to that fun watercolor frame that we created. And that one looks particularly tie-dye-y. Okay, then my favorite of all the cards, this one has 4 frames on it. And I matted that on white cardstock and added it to a white square note card. In the center, I put a sentiment that says, I appreciate you so much. And that's from this Pinkfresh Studio Thanks stamp set. And then finally, we have another one with a different frame. This is the Pinkfresh Botanical branch die. It also has that frame around it, so I thought it would work well for these watercolor pieces. I just glued my frame onto a watercolor piece, trimmed off the excess, and added a little sentiment from the Pinkfresh Studio Playful Animals 2 stamp set. Okay, I have one more variation of this technique that I wanted to share with you, and that is to add that shine over your watercolor area inside of the frame. It gives kind of a stained glass effect. In this case, I assembled my frame over the watercolor piece just as I did before, but I'm filling in all of the open areas with Ranger Glossy accents. This is just liquid and it's clear, and when it dries, it gives it gorgeous shine. Now I use a toothpick or something tiny to kind of push the glossy accents into the tiny little areas, the nooks and crannies. You want to make sure you fill all of it. Now I didn't put a super thick layer on, but you can if you want to. Bubbles may form, which you can pop with like a toothpick or a craft pick, but I like to leave them. You can also use a needle to push the glossy accents around if it's a really tight spot. Now I fill this with as much glossy accents as I can, and I end up getting some on top of my top white die cut. That's okay, I just die cut another of the white die cut, and I'm adding that on top just so I have a clean look. I then set this aside to dry overnight, and when you wake up, you have this beautiful kind of stained glass look to your piece. So it's just one added step, but it really adds a lot to this simple card. So I just wanted to share that option with you too. So I hope you give these faux tie-dye techniques a try. Lila and I had so much fun making them, and we think you will too. If you are interested in all of these supplies, they are linked in my YouTube description below. Or if you're at my blog, I link them in my post also. In the middle are a couple other videos that are related that might be helpful also. I appreciate you spending the time here. I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you soon.